Have you ever wondered where the art of the impossible escape truly began, before the great magicians took the stage? Long before Harry Houdini dazzled the world with his underwater cells and straitjackets, there was another name that whispered through the dark alleys of history. This figure was not a showman in a theater, but a desperate soul fighting for his life against the crushing weight of the law. His stage was the cold stone of a prison cell, and his audience was a city hungry for a hero who could defy the iron grip of authority. We invite you to step back into the fog and filth of the 18th century to meet the man who turned breaking out of prison into a spectator sport. The year is 1724, and the location is London, England. It is a sprawling metropolis of contrasting worlds, where the gilded palaces of the aristocracy sit uncomfortably close to the squalid slums of the poor. The air is thick with the smoke of coal fires and the stench of the open sewers that run through the cobbled streets. Crime is not just a nuisance here, but a way of life for thousands who struggle to survive in the shadows of the growing empire. In this chaotic urban jungle, a young carpenter named Jack Sheppard is about to carve his name into the folklore of the city, not with wood, but with the audacity of his defiance. Jack Sheppard was born into poverty in the heart of Spitalfields, a district known for its silk weavers and its hardship. He was a small and frail-looking boy who seemed destined for a life of obscurity and toil. However, beneath his unassuming exterior lay a sharp mind and a body capable of remarkable agility and strength. He was apprenticed to a carpenter, where he learned the secrets of wood and metal and the intricate mechanisms of locks and doors. These skills, which were meant to build honest homes, would soon be turned toward dismantling the cages built to hold him. His transition from a craftsman to a legend began with a simple twist of fate and bad company. Enter the villain of our story, a man named Jonathan Wild, who styled himself as the thief-taker general of Great Britain. Wild was a mastermind of corruption who ran a criminal empire under the guise of law enforcement. He controlled the thieves of London by organizing their crimes and then turning them in for the reward money if they refused to obey his commands. He was a spider sitting in the center of a vast web, and he demanded absolute loyalty from the underworld. When young Jack Sheppard refused to bend the knee to this crime lord, he became a target. This rivalry would spark a game of cat and mouse that would captivate the entire nation. The descent of Jack Sheppard into the world of crime was rapid and fueled by his association with a woman named Elizabeth Lyon, also known as Edgeworth Bess. They frequented the taverns of Drury Lane, where the ale flowed freely and the moral code was loose. Jack began with petty theft, stealing spoons and linens from the houses where he worked as a carpenter. But the thrill of the act and the need for money soon pushed him toward bolder crimes. He possessed a natural talent for entering places that were meant to be secure. He could slip through windows and pick locks with a dexterity that left the constables baffled and the victims terrified. His first major brush with the law occurred when he was arrested for burglary and thrown into the St. Giles Roundhouse. This was a holding cell designed to keep drunks and petty thieves off the streets for the night. To a man like Jack Sheppard, it was barely a challenge. He examined the wooden ceiling and realized it was the weakest point of the structure. With nothing but a razor and the strength of his arms, he cut through the timber and broke out through the roof. He lowered himself into the churchyard below and vanished into the night, leaving the watchman to find an empty cell in the morning light. The escape from St. Giles was merely a warm-up for what was to come. Jack had tasted freedom, and he realized that the stone walls of the law were not absolute. He continued his spree of burglaries, often targeting the wealthy patrons who lived in the fashionable squares of London. His reputation began to grow among the lower classes, who saw him as a charming rogue rather than a dangerous criminal. He was the little man fighting against the heavy hand of the state and the corrupt influence of Jonathan Wild. But Wild was not a man to be trifled with, and he redoubled his efforts to capture the elusive carpenter. It was not long before Jack was captured again, and this time he was sent to the new prison in Clerkenwell, along with his mistress Edgeworth Bess. The new prison was a formidable fortress, surrounded by high walls and guarded by armed turnkeys. Jack and Bess were placed in a secure cell and fettered with heavy irons. Most men would have given up hope, but Jack saw the challenge as a puzzle to be solved. He used a small file that had been smuggled in to cut through his chains. Then, with incredible strength, he removed the iron bars from the window and used his own sheets to lower Bess to the ground before following her to freedom. This second escape sent shockwaves through the city of London. The newspapers began to report on the exploits of Jack Sheppard with a mixture of outrage and admiration. He was becoming a celebrity, a figure who could outwit the best efforts of the authorities. Jonathan Wild was furious. His authority as the thief-taker general was being undermined by a 22-year-old boy who treated prison walls like minor inconveniences. Wild unleashed his network of spies and informants, offering a massive reward for the capture of the escape artist. The net was tightening around Jack, but he seemed to revel in the danger. Jack remained on the run for months, dodging the thief-takers and hiding in the labyrinth of alleyways that made up the criminal districts. He continued to rob and steal, driven by a fatalistic belief that he could not be held. However, his luck eventually ran out when he was betrayed by an associate loyal to Jonathan Wild. Jack was captured and dragged before the court, where he was sentenced to death for burglary. The judge ordered him to be taken to Newgate Prison, the most notorious and feared dungeon in all of England. This was the end of the line, or so everyone thought. Newgate Prison was a hell on earth, a place of disease and despair where the condemned waited for their journey to the gallows at Tyburn. Jack was placed in the condemned hold, a dark and damp cellar filled with the most desperate criminals in the land. He was chained to the floor with heavy staples and watched day and night. Yet even here in the belly of the beast, Jack plotted his next move. He knew that the only way out was to exploit the negligence of the guards and the flaws in the ancient architecture of the prison. He waited for the perfect moment when the vigilance of the turnkeys wavered. The opportunity arrived when two women came to visit him at the grate of the condemned hold. While the guards were distracted by the conversation, Jack managed to work on one of the iron spikes that separated him from the visitors. He broke the spike, and with the help of the women, he was pulled through the narrow gap. It was a physical impossibility for a normal man, but Jack was slender and flexible. Once through the grate, he disguised himself in a woman's dress and walked out of the prison under the noses of the guards. He was free once again, and the legend of the escape artist grew to mythical proportions. The public reaction to this third escape was nothing short of hysteria. Ballads were written about Jack Sheppard, and pantomimes were performed in the theaters depicting his adventures. He was the talk of the coffeehouses and the taverns. People toasted his health and wagered on how long he would stay free. Jonathan Wild was humiliated. The man who controlled the underworld could not control one slip of a carpenter. Wild vowed that he would see Jack hanged if it was the last thing he did. The hunt for Jack became a personal vendetta for the thief-taker general. Jack fled to the countryside, trying to lay low in Northamptonshire, but the pull of London was too strong. He returned to the city and was inevitably spotted. He was captured on Finchley Common drunk and disorderly, and brought back to Newgate Prison. This time, the authorities were taking no chances. Jack was taken to the stone room in the heart of the prison. He was loaded with 300 pounds of iron weights. His wrists were handcuffed, and his legs were encased in heavy shears. He was chained to the floor, and a guard was posted to watch him every hour. The governor of the prison declared that escape was now impossible. The stage was set for the greatest escape in the history of criminology. It was the night of October 14, 1724. Jack was alone in the stone room, the guards having left him for the night confident in his chains. Jack began by slipping his small hands out of the handcuffs. He had kept his thumbs squeezed tight to his palms to reduce the size of his hands. Once his hands were free, he used a crooked nail he had found to pick the padlock that held his leg chains to the floor. He was still wearing the heavy leg irons, but he was no longer anchored to the ground. He pulled the leg irons up and tied them to his waist with his garters to stop them from clanking against the stone. He then climbed up the chimney of the stone room. The chimney was blocked by an iron bar, but Jack worked at the masonry with his broken link of chain until the bar came loose. He squeezed through the soot and emerged into the red room above, which had not been used in years. It was dark and filled with dust, but Jack did not pause. He found a door that was bolted from the other side. He picked the lock by feeling the tumblers with his nail and pushed it open. He was now in a corridor that led to the chapel. However, a series of formidable doors stood in his way. The first door was massive and studded with iron nails. Jack attacked the lock with his makeshift tools, but it would not budge. He then decided to break through the wall itself. He worked feverishly, tearing away the plaster and the lath until he could reach his hand through and undo the bolt. He moved to the next door, and the next, each one presenting a new mechanical puzzle that he solved with the genius of a master craftsman. He reached the chapel of Newgate and climbed over the high wall into the upper leads. He was now on the roof of the prison high, above the city of London. The air was cold, and the stars looked down on his solitary struggle. He was not safe yet. He had to descend to the roofs of the neighboring houses. He realized he had left his blanket back in the cell. In a moment of sheer madness or bravery, he went all the way back through the broken doors and the chimney to retrieve his blanket. He returned to the roof and tore the blanket into strips to make a rope. He tied the rope to a chimney stack and lowered himself down onto the roof of a turner's house that adjoined the prison. He slipped through an open garret window and found himself inside the house. He crept down the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. The family was asleep, and he passed them like a ghost. He reached the street door, unlocked it, and stepped out into the cool night air. He was free. He had defied the might of the British legal system and the laws of physics. He walked away from Newgate, leaving his chains behind as a testament to his will. When the guards entered the stone room the next morning, they found only the broken chains and the pile of rubble in the chimney. The governor of Newgate was stunned. The story of the escape spread like wildfire. Jack Sheppard was no longer just a thief. He was a supernatural being in the eyes of the public. The king himself demanded to see the chains, and the drawings of the escape route were published in the newspapers. Jack had achieved a level of fame that rivaled the monarch. He was the most famous man in England, and for a brief moment he was untouchable. But the tragedy of Jack Sheppard was that he did not know how to live as a free man. He was addicted to the adoration of the crowd. Instead of fleeing the country, he stayed in London, disguised as a gentleman. He wore a fine suit and a wig, and paraded through the streets enjoying the whispers of the people. He drank in the taverns, where his name was on everyone's lips. This hubris would be his undoing. He believed he was invincible, that no cage could hold him, and therefore no law could touch him. He was wrong. On the night of October 31st, just 2 weeks after his great escape, Jack was drinking heavily in a tavern on Drury Lane. He was spotted by a pot boy who recognized the famous fugitive beneath his fine clothes. The boy alerted the authorities, and the constables rushed the tavern. Jack was too drunk to fight back or to run. He was overwhelmed and dragged back to Newgate Prison for the final time. This time there would be no cell and no chains. He was placed in the middle of the prison under the constant watch of armed guards until his execution day. The procession to Tyburn on November 16, 1724 was a spectacle unlike any other. 200,000 people lined the streets of London to see the hero pass. That was 1/3 of the entire population of the city. They did not come to jeer at a criminal, they came to cheer for a legend. Girls threw flowers at the cart, and men raised their hats in respect. Jack sat on his coffin, waving to the crowd, acting the part of the showman to the very end. He had planned one last escape, involving a penknife to cut the ropes, but it was found and confiscated. At the gallows, the atmosphere was tense. The crowd was on the verge of a riot. They wanted to save their hero from the noose. Jonathan Wild stood by watching his nemesis face the end. As the cart pulled away and Jack was left swinging, the crowd surged forward. They broke through the line of soldiers not to attack the body, but to retrieve it. There was a belief that if they could get him to a doctor quickly enough, he could be revived. The mob fought over his body, carrying it away in a chaotic frenzy that lasted for hours. The legacy of Jack Sheppard did not die on the gallows. In the years that followed, his story was retold in countless plays and novels. Daniel Defoe, the author of Robinson Crusoe, wrote a biography of Jack as if he were a great statesman. John Gay wrote The Beggar's Opera, based on the rivalry between Jack and Jonathan Wild. The character of Masheath was a direct tribute to the charm and daring of the carpenter. Jack had become an archetype, the lovable rogue who defies the corrupt authority. But his influence reached even further into the future. The very concept of the escape artist as a performer has its roots in the sensation caused by Jack Sheppard. He transformed the act of breaking chains from a crime into a performance of skill and endurance. When Harry Houdini began his career, nearly 2 centuries later, he studied the history of famous criminals and their methods. Houdini adopted the challenge of the impossible, escaped the publicity stunts, and the public defiance of restraints that Jack had pioneered. Houdini sanitized the act, moving it from the prison to the theater, but the DNA of the performance remained the same. The handcuffs, the locked boxes, the impossible odds, these were the elements of the drama that Jack Sheppard had lived. Houdini was the polished showman, but Jack was the raw original. The thrill that the audience feels when the magician emerges from the water torture cell is the same thrill that the London crowds felt when they heard Jack had broken out of the stone room. It is the universal human desire to see the spirit triumph over physical confinement. The story of Jack Sheppard also brought about the downfall of Jonathan Wild. The public hatred for the thief-taker general grew so intense after the execution of Jack that Wild's empire began to crumble. His crimes were exposed, and he too was sent to Newgate. When Wild was taken to Tyburn to be hanged, the crowd did not cheer him. They pelted him with stones and mud, cursing the man who had hunted down their hero. In the end, the carpenter had won the war for the hearts of the people. So the next time you see a magician escape from a straitjacket or slip out of a pair of handcuffs, remember the young carpenter from Spitalfields. Remember the soot-stained boy climbing through the chimney of Newgate Prison with the weight of the world on his ankles. Jack Sheppard may have been a thief and a housebreaker, but he was also an artist of liberty. He showed the world that stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage, if the human will is strong enough to break them. The mystery of his talent remains. Was it just knowledge of carpentry, or was it a preternatural gift for mechanics? How did a malnourished boy generate the force to snap iron bars? These questions linger in the dusty archives of the Old Bailey. Jack Sheppard represents the spark of rebellion that lives in all of us, the part that refuses to be caged. He is the ghost in the machine of the justice system, the eternal reminder that no lock is unbreakable. As we close the docket on this case, we are left with the image of the empty cell and the broken chains. It is a powerful symbol that transcends the centuries. Jack Sheppard lived fast, died young, and left a legacy that defied the hangman. He was the escape artist who inspired a genre, and in doing so, he achieved the only immortality that truly matters. He became a story that never ends. From the grime of London to the bright lights of Broadway, the lineage of the escape artist is a straight line drawn in blood and iron. It reminds us that the greatest magic is not a trick of the eye, but the resilience of the human spirit. And somewhere in the shadows of history, Jack Sheppard is still running, still climbing, and still breaking free. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the past on Midnight Docket. We hope you found the story of the original escape artist as captivating as the crowds of 1724. The past is filled with such puzzles and people who defy explanation. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your mind unlocked, for the truth is always stranger than fiction.